Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. My name is Uzair, and it's been a while since I've had an entrepreneur on the podcast to talk about what's going on in the startup ecosystem in the country. And so I'm really excited about this discussion focused on the Edtech space. And I have the honor of hosting today Aiman Bashir. She's co-founder and CEO at Outclass. She has an MBA from LUMS, worked at World Bank, Nestle, Coca-Cola, but then in 2020 decided to be an entrepreneur and started Outclass, which is a world-class edtech platform. Their instructors come from one of the world's best institutions, and they all want to be change makers in the sense that they want to improve access to education in the country. And if you're familiar with Pakistan's demographics, then you know that the youth is a major dividend opportunity for the country, but there are significant challenges that the youth faces in terms of access to world-class education. So I'm glad that Outclass is sort of pushing that agenda forward, and I'm excited about hosting Aiman today. So Aiman, first of all, thanks for taking out the time and welcome to Pakistonomy.
Thank you, Uzair. Thank you for having me. I've been excited to do this, and let's get started.
Yeah, so let's jump in. I want to start with getting a sense about your own sort of journey, right? I mean, there is, and I've spoken to a few entrepreneurs and noticed this trend in Pakistan that the old sort of, goal that people had from my generation and your generation, ke Engro mein jana hai or Standard Chartered or Coca-Cola, right? You were part of that crew, but there's been a shift in the sense that you want to be entrepreneurs and sort of do something for your own self and for the country. So tell us a bit about your own journey and how and why and what led you to, starting Outclass and the mission behind the startup itself.
Yeah, no, great question. I'll answer it in three ways. The first is it has to do with entrepreneurship, has to do with, I think there's this innate, आपके DNA में होता है, it has to be, it should come from within, and people who have it know it, because उसके कुछ symptoms होते हैं, which are you feel very, very boxed in regular jobs, you want to do more, no job is good enough, so you just have this innate feeling that I should be doing more, I should be my own boss. And I always had that, but it took me a decade to realize it. So that was the first one, like inner drive. The second one was the feeling of this weight of privilege on me. And I'm very, very cognizant, very aware of the fact that I'm perhaps one of the few 0.01% of women in our country who are fortunate enough to go to the best universities and have a supporting financially sound family and really not really that much to lose. So I talked to my twin brother, by the way, Usman, who's also a co-founder in Outclass, and I discussed that, listen, it'll be a shame if I end up doing what everyone else is doing when I could be doing a lot more, and I really want to do justice to the privilege that has been granted by a stroke of luck. So that was the second. And the third, I think, is the main reason is my third co-founder, Ali Numani. He's also a really good friend, taught me this Japanese concept of ikigai, which is basically the right balance between profession, passion, and there was a third one, vocation. But basically, your mission, passion, profession has to be aligned in order for you to have a meaningful, happy life. So for me, entrepreneurship became that profession, education became my passion and my mission, and that is actually how Outclass came into being. I decided that let's just pursue something that I would love to work for, a cause, a purpose, and then in the process become successful, and then that's the innate entrepreneurial DNA speaking. So sorry, that was a really long answer, but I hope I made sense.
Oh, that's a great segue into my next question, which is going to be, how did you then align that entrepreneurial hunger with education, and what is the market opportunity or the market problem that Outclass is trying to solve for? So help me understand a bit about Outclass, what it does, what's the sort of initial goal and mission of the organization, and then secondly, because this is a huge market and it's a fast digitizing market, it's a young market. Just today, I was, for example, looking at an ad by Byju's, which is one of the most highly valued companies across the board in India. It's an edtech platform, right? And they're acquiring, they've received a lot of funding. They, in fact, sponsor the Indian cricket team. now, which is
Yes.
amazing for a startup and an edtech startup to do. It excites me that that's what's happening. So just help us understand about the opportunity and where Outclass is and what it's trying to do.
The opportunity is in terms of economic value or economic or business opportunity. It's there, yes. But more than that, the opportunity lies in the impact. Pakistan has 1/3 children out of school. We're short of 700,000 teachers. This is a problem brick and mortar simply cannot solve. So हम उसी एक phase में लगे रहेंगे where we're struggling to build more enough schools, and then we have to excuse me, fill them up with good teachers, and then in the process आपकी population भी बढ़ रही है. So there's a gap that simply can't be filled. So that economic need is also attached to the societal and the country's need. But even in terms of business, it's very simple. Look, Byju's is one example, and I really don't. Usually, I stay away from quoting Byju's because I think that's also an anomaly. But वो एक उसको देख के नहीं करना चाहिए. But even around us, for example, in Indonesia, 5-6 years ago, they were following the same trend. Everybody, all the investors were investing in ये आपकी quick commerce, in fintech, in health tech. Nobody was really looking at edtech, and then this one company popped up. Two co-founders, very similar story to us. They started their edtech thing. They started as a marketplace, a tutor marketplace. This is 6-7 years ago, I think, and evolved into this huge. They're a unicorn now, but Indonesia, I think, is relying on, and they're called Ruan Guru. That's just one example. China has its own examples, but India, maybe there are so many other companies who are now, like, they're giving a tough time to these brick and mortar test prep academies. And that's where, we come in also. We started with this niche segment. I call it niche because it's not the heart of the problem, but it's a big economical problem. That a lot of our parents and students, they spend too much money on tuitions and on test prep because it's that part of edtech which brings the results. Which आपका हमारे subcontinent में there's this thing that we need to get grades, we need to secure good jobs. It's a cycle, and it's a ladder that everyone has to go through. And हमारे बचपन से भी आप, I don't know if how familiar you are. There have been these physical tuition academies since the last 30-40 years. I remember.
I fully remember. Sorry to interrupt. Going after school to accounting and physics and biology, and it would be hard to get into some of the best tuitions because it was expensive, but they would get booked out.
They would get booked out because it was celebrity status भी है कुछ का. There's brand name कि अच्छा XYZ. I won't take names, but you know who I'm referring to. Some teachers have that pull. And students just say अच्छा यहाँ कोई magic recipe मिलेगी which will just absorb and suddenly will get A's. Because of that, there's been we shy away from this word using mafia, but there is a tuition mafia in Pakistan, and it's not just for O levels, A levels. It's everywhere. It's across grades. Grade 9 से ऊपर, so that's where it's the highest. Grade 9.
I don't know. Again, sorry to interrupt, but I don't know if you saw this trend in Lahore and other parts. I saw this in Karachi, for example, when I was in high school. That some of the teachers that would teach in school, their standard of teaching would be far lower than what they would teach at the tuition academy, right? They would be phenomenally different, the experience of sitting in the classroom.
Yes, no, you've hit it on the head. वो basically it's उनका जो funnel है वो is the classroom. So they actually recruit students from actual classrooms. They don't usually, teachers don't teach that well, and then when students don't understand, they say बाद में academy में आना and पढ़ लेना. So it's really they're part of the problem, and then खुद ही उसको वो एक kind of exploitation भी है. Parents भी कहते हैं हम क्या करें, अब खुद तो हमसे पढ़ाया नहीं जा रहा. O level, A level, and SSE, and MD CAT and all of these courses. So that's a big problem, G, and that's what we started with. We kind of went like with the Tesla strategy कि आप पहले roadster को figure out करें. First see if this is monetizable, if it's scalable, if it actually works, if there's an appetite, and then make a product for the masses. Kind of like a Robin Hood model that I personally don't want Outclass to be an edtech that's relying on grants alone. I really want it to be fundamentally a business. It should make financial sense, and in the process not be exploitative and also do good for the country. Like our dream is, GK, one day we have enough content, a quality content that we can just give it to schools in Quetta or in Peshawar or in Gilgit or in far-flung areas where you wouldn't have access to the top teachers or you wouldn't have schools. Eventually देखिए जी infrastructure and technology पहुंच जाएगी, पाकिस्तान में internet आ जाएगा, but at that time we want to be there ready that okay guys, you don't have to pay for this, partner with public schools, offer this content. You just need, instead of getting the best teachers in every school and then, or not even the best, getting teachers is going to be a nightmare if you talk about scalability. उससे ज़्यादा आसान ये नहीं है कि आप एक arrangement कर लें government के साथ, schools के साथ, where you can just give your content. You just need a coordinator in the room. You have a projector, you have interactive, engaging content that students can listen to, learn from. And then of course, it's not an alternative for schools, but it is a really good asset to have in terms of quality education, कि आप deprive ना हो. एक बच्चा जो सिब्बी में बैठा है या कहीं बलोचिस्तान में कहीं बैठा है, उसको क्यों एक्सेस ना हो पाकिस्तान के KGS के टीचर्स का, HSN के टीचर्स का, Ivy League टीचर्स का. They should at least have the access. It should be affordable. That's what our mission is, Ji, that eventually we want to be that resource where everyone can say, अच्छा ठीक है, it's okay if my kid can't go to, I don't have to travel to XYZ city to get them an education. I can sit here, I just need to give him a laptop and an internet connection, and they're good. They can then survive on their own and get the same education. So that's our broader plan, and we're on our way. And we've been in talks with a school in Quetta, and let's see how that goes. We're trying to lock a partnership with them where we give them, they want to introduce O-levels, this, and we really want to help them do that. So let's see, I'll let you know how that goes, but we're very excited. It's already started.
No, that's awesome. And I agree. I like your approach in the sense that, given the OA level gap that's there and that's monetizable very early on as well. So the success there can translate into other things that perhaps may not at the onset seem as monetizable, but over time will become. And I love the fact that you're in talks with the school in Quetta. The one thing that I sort of noticed and through my own career, for example, right, I used to be in strategy consulting and, was working with a lot of data for a client on Excel. And I was like, yeah, bada boring kaam hai. There must be a different way to do this, right? And I went on Coursera and found a class on Python. It was a University of Michigan class. I just sat there in the evenings and watched the videos, did my own coding. And in a couple of weeks, I knew enough Python to like sort of replace or automate my own job, right? And the reason why I mentioned that is because A, it's a great equalizer in the sense that you can learn new skills, but B, in a country like Pakistan, where we talk about the youth dividend, freelancing jobs, technology jobs, we've just recently, I wrote a paper on Web3 opportunity in Pakistan and all about talent, right? We need to skill that talent. And so how are you thinking about some of the technical sort of talent opportunities that are there that says, okay, you may have come out of O-levels, A-levels, but especially for women, right, or young girls coming from rural backgrounds, they may have cultural barriers. And yes, we need to get rid of those barriers, but they may have a cell phone that says, you know what, you can learn coding and you start participating on Fiverr or Upstart or whatever and make really good money. And that's exports for the country also. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. How are you thinking about some of those trainings?
नहीं, आपने हमारा business roadmap खुद ही बता दिया जी. This is exactly what we're thinking, the lines we're thinking on. We're actually, ये तो एक part है of like progressive learning, where yes, coding is just one part. It's very important. Yes, we're already in works. We're going to be partnering with Edtech. There are some really good Edtechs already doing it. So the plan very much is to somehow do it together. I really believe in the partnership synergies, like jo magic formula hota hai. So we're looking for that. But yes, definitely on our roadmap. But more than that, we're also really looking forward to polishing Pakistan's professional sector. There are a lot of, because I've been through it, so I know कि एक काफी बड़ा एक gap है between basic things like presentation. So a lot of the people in Pakistan, and you'd think, yaar, ye to har jagah YouTube pe bhi hoti hain, wo 10 tips to nail an interview or how to present to your boss. But you'd be surprised to know nobody really knows how to present a basic presentation or how to maneuver through PowerPoint, or bilkul basic. So we're really looking forward to it. This is just one example. But negotiation skills, okay, it's very different negotiating with a SAT, for example, than with a middle tier manager versus a contractor. But so there are layers to negotiation, there are layers to how you present. Acha, apne apni pockets mein haath khade hoke nahi present karna, basic, but people don't know that. How do you make a good pitch? Over the last 1 year, we've been lucky enough to be coached by so many wonderful mentors. Ye startup journey mein, we'd really like to push that forward and try to. So aapki soft skill trainings bhi are part of that journey where we want to introduce a lot of things. We don't want to stick to just test prep. I think personally, if you ask me in the next 8 years, 10 years, ये पढ़ाई और ये curriculum जो है ये बिल्कुल मुझे लगता है कि outdated हो जाएंगे. And really, just yesterday I was telling my cousin, he's now in that phase where he's looking for कौन सी university में जाना है, क्या करना है, क्या job करनी है. And I said, please ये engineer doctor से बाहर निकल आओ. The future is coding. खुद से courses पढ़ो, खुद से करो. You don't need to go for a master's in engineering. And अभी we're in 2022, and this is my advice to him. And उसके class fellows सारे वही कर रहे हैं. Like they're still going. There's a paradigm shift that's going to come where people will just stop pursuing these degrees, master's degrees from Ivy Leagues and master's degrees from this, that. ये नहीं होगा, because Pakistan really needs, आपकी वाली बात, tech talent. It's going to be a great financial booster. People can then work freelance, and आपकी economy को फायदा होगा. This is what the future is, and we're definitely working towards it. This is on our roadmap. Inshallah.
That's awesome, and best of luck with that, because I think that's what's needed overall. And I love your point on negotiating and the fact that it's very different negotiating with the state versus a manager. I remember it took me back to my own undergrad negotiating class where you learned the theories and everything, and the professor was really good, but he used to be a union negotiator, right? So he would make you part of the final project was not a paper or a strategy document. It was, you had to negotiate with him. And he would pretend to be a laundry owner, or he would pretend to be a contractor, or you pretend to be a sales associate at a Nordstrom.
Yeah.
And he would very good at sort of role playing. And so it was a great experience because you got to apply those skills, right? And that level of, bringing world-class instructors to that sort of platform like yours is awesome, because all of a sudden the student is exposed to a lot more diverse, skill sets through that learning experience that otherwise would not be possible. Couple of other questions that I had about Outclass itself. How are you thinking about like multilingual training, right? Because Pakistan is a diverse country. A lot of these students in far off places like Quetta may not, right now it's OA levels, but over time English may not be there sort of, or Urdu even would not be the language of learning for them at the onset. So how are you thinking about bridging that multilingual gap?
So there are, again, two parts to this question in my answer. The first is, currently we've used Urdu and English. We had to start somewhere. We didn't want to go English only. I've been a teacher, and Pakistan mein, there's one thing that I've seen happen is, agar aap khali English mein padhaye, to 20% of the lecture wo sun lete hain, baki 80% they just don't follow. So we've intentionally used a bilingual approach in our current lessons. We teach them how to attempt a question. Everything, all of that is in English, because eventually we started with O levels and A levels and SAT. So us pe to bahut zyada ek focus hota hai on English. But moving on, very important point about different languages. The way to go about that is, we also want to introduce live classes, because that again is something that over the past year we've realized is a need of the market. And while that's not as scalable as a pre-recorded, ready-to-use product, but the beauty is, once you're doing pre-recorded and you have content, like visual content to aid your teaching, then you can partner with local good teachers and get them to do live lessons using your platform, and then that becomes scalable. So that's what we want to do, Ji. Once we have enough products and we have the content ready, we're just going to get the best teachers in those cities and maybe have lessons, live lessons on our platform to address the market need as well as the language preference.
That's awesome. And last question on the business side, and I want to then pivot to the broader startup ecosystem in the country. How are you thinking about sort of, the approach in terms of where things are currently in edtech in the country and where they're headed to, in the sense that, obviously there's this, policy disconnect, right? In the sense that we will talk about digital Pakistan, but we tax internet access. We talk about digital Pakistan, but we tax devices, and in a regressive manner, not even a progressive manner. So that's on the policy side. And then secondly, you're a young company, started in 2020. You started with some assumptions, obviously, in terms of what the market was like, what the experience would be like. What are things that have stood out to you in terms of, this is really amazing in terms of what we've learned, and also perhaps our assumptions were a bit off? So, it's two questions here: policy, one, and then two, like your own experience as Outclass, and what have you learned over the last couple of years or so?
देखिए policy के ऊपर जो I think the thing that's the issue at hand is that edtech education broadly, but edtech in particular is, I think, one of the most underrated sectors in investment, in terms of priority, in terms of just generally it's being overlooked. Partly अभी के लिए जो COVID की वजह से हुआ है कि there was I call it a band-aid solution. COVID हो गया, schools had to scramble and come up with something, and then Zoom classes शुरू हुई, and it actually put people off edtech. Teachers भी like they were like ये क्या है, and students
even
were
parents,
like not engaged. And
sorry to interrupt.
Like, बच्चा घर जाए, yeah, no, exactly. So there's a big disconnect between, okay, do we even want edtech? Does it really work? I think like most people think it sucks, but what they've been exposed to isn't really edtech, if you think about it. But that's just one part of the problem, I think. The other is it's going to take a while, for people to understand and pick up that, okay, you know what, maybe we really do need it. Maybe, yes, these young entrepreneurs, because we're just one of many. There are others who are doing amazing work. Some are VC backed, some are organically growth, stories. But people are doing now, they're doing work in edtech. It's going to pick up, and I think that's when there's going to be a major shift in policy, and everything is going to align, and then it will become, an overall a conducive environment for investors and for people to keep working. अगर 2 साल में honestly यही हालात रहे जो आपकी वाली बात है कि ना conducive रहा environment, we probably were going to pack up and go, because we can't, it's not a battle we can fight alone. All of these other entrepreneurs, they're looking at the kind of support that you're talking about. It's lacking, yes, but I think कोई choice नहीं, and eventually we're going to get there. The second part is also linked with my answer about parents. There's one assumption that we had was that, okay, this is, we started with test prep. It was the most monetized segment, and we went in thinking that we're going to be 1/4 the price. It'll be a no-brainer. It's going to be quality content, so what's not to like, and it'll just go off the charts, and बहुत मजा आएगा, बहुत लोग accept करेंगे. The thing is, Pakistanis have a mindset where they want to see, feel, actually think that okay, this is the service that we're getting. Kali videos say they're not maybe as satisfied or willing to pay. That's going to change, because it has changed everywhere. And based on that learning, we made our videos, our lessons more interactive. We added a layer of quizzes, we added counselors, we made it more engaging, and that really helped. But हमने overestimate किया था market की appetite को, and we learned that very quickly. But this is something that everyone else is feeling in the industry, in edtech, that maybe it's not, they're not quite as ready to jump into edtech. And this, I link it with my answer, because this has to do with what the pandemic did. लोगों ने कहा था कि जी ओहो, आप तो बहुत अच्छे टाइम पे आए हैं, pandemic हुआ है, people are looking for alternatives, you're going to be a massive hit. No, because what happened was pandemic hua, people, schools and teachers and everyone else, all these tutoring places, they started Zoom lessons, otherwise they would have gone out of business. And that makeshift solution really sucked. People were like, ये क्या है, Zoom पे पीछे कभी connection टूट रहा है, live lesson खत्म हो रहा है, recordings नहीं available, पीछे से कुर्सी वाला गुजर रहा है, teacher पढ़ा रही है. It was like a really bad quality-wise, really bad experience. And that made people kind of wary about, okay, do we really need this? But जो काम हो रहा है tech में, there are some players that are really, they're going to live doubt solving. Other people are doing great things like animated videos, all of that. It's going to have an impact. It's just going to be really, it's a slow cook, वो broth के उसको time लगेगा. It's not, I joke this with my co-founders, देखें guys, this is not instant 2-minute Maggie noodle. It's going to take a while. So like, we have to ensure the quality doesn't get compromised. We're just doing everything right. Market, the appetite is going to like warm up, but yes, and when it does that, I think that's also when the policies are going to start shifting. So it's going to be a paradigm shift, both in terms of how the government is going to make it conducive and how the people of Pakistan are going to want it more. That's my hope. If it doesn't, then we'll talk about some other business and start something else.
No, I think it's going to scale. I think the palette, so to speak, of the market will shift. And I agree with you that the pandemic was sort of a double-edged sword in that sense, because the experience was clunky. I remember my friends here in Washington and people I knew in Pakistan, like, homework ho raha hai, uski phir tasveer li ja rahi hai, and then you're sending it over WhatsApp. Yeah. And then the teacher's like, I can't read this. Can you send another picture? And it's like, it's a pain for the parents, right? Because it's not like that's the only, all of a sudden they're doing the hard work that otherwise would happen in the classroom, right? And that experience was not great at all.
And from the teacher's point of view, my mother is a food and nutrition teacher. She teaches O levels she's visiting faculty, and उनको बहुत problem होती थी. She was like, बच्चे कैमरे ऑफ करके बैठे होते हैं. I don't know if I should continue teaching or delivering my lesson, or if I should first make them somehow attentive कि आप अपने cameras turn on करें, because it's a 30-minute class after all. So both ends पे बहुत problem थी. बच्चे cameras off करके सो रहे हैं, आप teacher को क्या पता है कि वो बैठा हुआ attentive है कि नहीं है. तो yes, थोड़ा सा था ये issue. But दूसरा, by the way, एक और learning, ये मुझे याद आ गई आपकी बात, question से, sorry, I'm adding it. There are two types of people in Pakistan. One are those children who are ideal for self-paced learning. They want to do things in their own place, in their own time. When we started, we thought, इससे बेहतर और क्या हो सकता है? Because I would love to have the option that, okay, I can study at 11 in the night in my pajamas and have my own coffee and अपने time पे pause and play. Turns out there's a big chunk of students who actually prefer going by a schedule. They don't have the discipline it needs to, okay, खुद बैठो, खुद alarm लगाओ, खुद पढ़ो. They're like, okay, I know मेरी 5 to 6 p.m. physics की class है. अगर मैं नहीं गया या नहीं गई, I'll lose, I'll miss out, so I better go. And then, so that was one thing that we learned through the journey, कि ऐसे नहीं है हर चीज, students don't prefer, everybody doesn't prefer a self-paced journey and in our own space, in our own time, wala concept. So we're trying to cater to both students now. We're going to add that layer of live teaching and, more scheduled, just to bring some discipline in.
I think that's also key in the sense that the age that we live in, right? It's a digital first age, which is great from an Edtech perspective, but is also not so great from an Edtech perspective because there's too many distractions, right? Like you turn off the camera or you can pause the class. It takes, and there's research even from the workplace, right? That interrupting somebody's work through meetings or calls or others leads to a decline in productivity. Now, this is for people out of college in the white collar workspace, right? Now, imagine a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid having to deal with that. And it's hard. And especially it's hard because their Instagram is popping up, TikTok pe kisi ne kuch funny bhej diya, something's on WhatsApp. It's not going to lead to the optimal outcome that they're looking for as well. So that interactivity is needed. But look, I think the business model is excellent. I think there's a lot of potential in there. And just from my own experience, going through O and A levels in Pakistan and then seeing my cousins and others go through that, it is a big market need, right? And I think the scaling opportunity is huge. I wish policymakers were front running this rather than, the industry running this, but it is what it is. Maybe we'll get there sooner rather than later. I want to switch to the startup ecosystem in Pakistan and sort of get your thoughts on this. Obviously, you left a career in sort of a stable sort of corporate Pakistan life, right? And now you're an entrepreneur. Pakistan's entrepreneurial ecosystem has exploded. There's a long way to go, but it's good to see it explode in the right ways. Where do you see this going, particularly from the aspect of women and entrepreneurship, right? And because, as you said, you come from a privileged background, you had the level of support, but when we look at the broader market data, a lot of women, even with tertiary education, decide not to be part of the labor force, forget about being entrepreneurs. So what are some of the things that you're seeing that excite you? And what are some of the things that you would like to see change because they don't excite you so much in the startup ecosystem?
I'll answer that in a couple of ways. The first is, as a woman entrepreneur, it's let's get to that later. But as an entrepreneur, I think there's this VC journey that's starting. That's a different beast altogether. You're seeing VC money being flooded, Pakistan being flooded by VC money, and I think that's a good sign, but it's also, like you said, double-edged sword wali cheez. It comes here as well, because it comes with a lot of expectation setting and, future mein ab kya hoga, because these bigger VC funds, ye jo companies ho gayi hain fund, now people are actually waiting and saying, okay, will this actually, was this a good bet? How will this turn out? And that will determine future funding. So, for example, if Airlift or if Craze Mart or if Truck Retainer, all these bigger companies, mashallah, they're getting really good traction and they got good funds. And Edtech maybe Abwab hai, Maqsad hai, Noon hai, all of these bigger companies, the next 2 or 3 years are going to be critical to see कि ab ye inhone kiya kya hai us VC funding se, and like how did that pan out, because Edtech is going to be very different, e-commerce is very different, fintech is very different. So I think it's going to be tricky. The ones who entered last year was a good time to enter because they were the ones who then got the funding. The next ones are going to have a bit of trouble because investors are now going to want to see, okay, what did the first batch do? Do they even, are they worth Series B, Series C, or is Pakistan really not that great a market even today? So that's a challenge for future entrepreneurs. By future, I mean the next 2 or 3 years. For women, it's difficult. I am not going to mince my words, because two cheezein, ek to women and investment, two things that don't go hand in hand. There's this perception that, okay, it's difficult for women. Investors ask different questions from women founders. The same questions are worded differently from male founders. I usually don't like to play the gender card or don't talk about these, because I think or itne masle hain ke, I don't want to get into that comparison, and just keep doing what we're doing. But yes, it is there, and that's difficult. And then uski ek root cause problem hai, again, presentation skills. How are you pitching your idea? How are you even, because it goes to grassroots level पे ना, कि आपने जब शुरू किया अपनी journey, what education did you get? What were you even trained? Okay, when you face investors, how are you going to talk? Men do get that training. Men socialize. There is an ecosystem for men entrepreneurs. They get to talk, or smoke breaks के ऊपर discuss करते हैं. Women, they're starting out. They're having वो तो office space में भी ratio इतनी कम होती है, 20:80 होती है in a good company, इससे बढ़ना बहुत कम. तो entrepreneurship में आप सोच लें कितनी कम होएगी. So yes, you really need to, I don't know how to word it, but so VC funding is not just the only type of entrepreneurship. I think we can help women in other sectors, smaller businesses. It's जरूरी नहीं कि आप उनको VC funding ही उस route पे जाएं, but yes, we really need to do work on how to pitch in front of an investor. The government needs to come up with grants or special funds just for female entrepreneurs, just to give them the funding that they need. So yeah, काफी मुझे sorry मैं आपके सवाल से बहुत distract हो गई because बहुत कुछ आया मेरे mind में, and then I lost track of my own train of thought. But yeah, that's
well this podcast is all about not mincing words and being cutthroat and honest about, and it is a problem. I mean, look, one of the encouraging things I mentioned Byju's at the top. Another encouraging thing, I don't know if you've seen the show, was Shark Tank India that just aired. It was a big hit over there.
Man.
It's everywhere, right? Yeah. And it was great in the sense that the organizers of the show made a very protracted effort to feature women entrepreneurs from all sorts of walks of life, right? Koi snacks bana raha hai, koi sari bana raha hai, koi fashion mein hai, koi entrepreneur hai. And it was great to see that. And perhaps we need something similar in Pakistan, because there is a shift, right? I see this in sort of my generation versus the younger generation, that whereas somebody like me coming out of undergrad would have been like, Anglo mein jana hai, ya Standard Chartered, ya MCB, etc. The new generation is like, I want to do my own thing. I want to hustle, right? And I want to have 3 or 4 hustles on the side on top of my first hustle. And that's entrepreneurship. And I think we need to celebrate that and, mainstream it and encourage people so that everybody from Karachi to Gujranwala to Sydney to Swat wants to be part of this movement, because that's the way to grow the economy. So hopefully we get there. I think we're getting there. And to your other point around, the next round of funding and does the market grow and meet its potential, I think you're on point, right? And I would take it one step further, is that ultimately, if you're valuing a company, and I don't want to name names, but let's say it's Airlift, right? The ultimate goal has to be exit, which is IPO. And to get there, it's a long way, but you have to grow exponentially. And if that doesn't happen, or a major Kareem-like buyout doesn't happen, then the entire ecosystem sort of suffers, right? Because it sort of puts a question mark. So you're on point, I think, on that. And that then connects to the broader economy, which is, if the middle class is thriving and growing and the economy is doing well, then average revenues per user grow, the spending amounts grow, the investment grows, savings grow, all of that is connected, which is beyond the startup ecosystem sort of domain. But it links, and I think people need to understand that importance as well on that.
Absolutely. On that note, I'd like to add that there's a very, very common ना कि आप India से compare करते हैं कि देखिए जी India में Byju's and India में Vedantu and so many others. Yeah, India the middle class is huge. And that's exactly what you're saying. That the middle class, I think, is what can actually make a startup, make it or break it. क्योंकि आपके सारे buyers ही वो हैं, they know just enough tech to be able to use an app, and they have just enough money to be able to spend a few hundred or a few thousands for a subscription per month. अब गरीब आदमी के पास तो ना ये tech है अभी और ना उसके पास ये appetite है, वो तो basic necessities की तरफ देख रहा है ना. And your elite class, for lack of a better word, or SEC A plus, they already have enough, and they're very small. So उससे आपका startup numbers मिलते ही नहीं है. So exactly what you said, your middle class has to be big enough, and it has to be growing for all of these players to make sense. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. वो बात आ जाएगी फिर end पे हम grants वाले model पे ही बैठे होंगे कि अच्छा जी फिर USAID से कुछ grant आ जाए, कुछ वहाँ से आ जाए, but financially stable model अगर आपने बनाना है, sustainable business बनाना है, I think you need to have a growing middle class appetite for that product. That's going to be key, and that's what we're struggling with Edtech also.
No, fully agree. I think it's a broader theme on this podcast as well, is like what are the reforms needed to get to that, but that's a topic for a separate conversation. I'm mindful of time, so a couple of last questions I have for you. We've touched upon sort of where things are and, negotiating and presentation and things like that. From your perspective, being in this ecosystem now, and the shift that we're seeing from the younger generation wanting to be entrepreneurs, what advice do you have for them in terms of either them wanting to have their own startup or being a startup like Outclass or something that's hypergrowth that aligns with their mission and purpose in life or what they perceive that to be? And how does somebody excel in this ecosystem coming who's 20 years old, 21 years old? Like what would you tell them to do and not to do?
Good question. I think first, and I'll base this on my own experience, not based on age or anything, just based on, okay, you're a startup entrepreneur, what should you expect? The first would be, get your hands dirty. Like, don't underestimate the grind. Don't think कि आप जैसे ही आएंगे, सबसे पहली चीज वो अपने LinkedIn पे CEO का टाइटल लगाते हैं, which is it's fun because आपने पहले नहीं सोचा होता. It's very different from a CEO in the corporate world and a CEO in the startup world. यहाँ जो आपका expect to be doing everything from paperwork to actual आपकी वाली बात के on ground negotiate कर रहे हैं आप, from execution to strategy to talking to investors, all of this you have to do alone, like as the CEO. So it's not really a glamorous job. That's the first one. So our work-life balance थोड़े सालों के लिए भूल जाएं. The second advice would be to, now you're in the grind and you have a company, you have a dream, you have to build it. I don't think like you should allow yourself a day or two to be bummed out about things, because there will be days that things won't go your way. आपको इन्वेस्टर्स सबसे ज्यादा आपको इतनी रिजेक्शन मिलेगी कि आप probably सोचेंगे मैं जिंदा क्यों हूँ, but give yourself a day or two, but no longer than that, because the thing is, once you're captain of the ship, if you're down, the crew is down. So your team will feed off your energy, and that's a big responsibility, and it takes a lot to stay positive. But it will be worth it. I'm hoping it'll be worth it for me as well. I'm still in my first year, but it really makes a difference, and you have to keep that energy. And I think the third would be to anyone, regardless of age, would be to get out of your comfort zone, like lose the inhibitions and learn how to sell. You'll be selling yourself, your vision, your product, your startup to everyone. Marilee, one of the biggest weaknesses has been rejection. Like I just can't stand taking rejection. It's been I'm being super vulnerable while sharing this on a podcast, but all my life I've felt कि अच्छा नहीं बस rejection now, बाकी सब वो सब खत्म हो गया है, क्योंकि once you're the face of a company and a startup and convincing people, and then 90% of them would say अच्छा चलो okay, good luck, and that's one form of rejection, and you have to really get over yourself and feel like, okay, what's the worst that could happen, and then move on. And if you're too comfortable, you're probably doing something wrong. You have to be a little nervous. I was nervous about this podcast, and then I thought, अच्छा इसका मतलब है ये ठीक है, I have to do this, and I have to be up for Uzair's questions, because he'll challenge me, and abhi tak that was the right decision. Let's see.
No,
things that I'd say.
No, that's great advice, and your point around doing things and getting uncomfortable and getting into the grind reminded me this morning. I was looking at Kulsum Lakhani's tweets, and she's talking about Bill Gates' visit and how he should have met, in my view, the majority of the population, which is the youth of this country. And it's a shame he didn't get to do that. And I was telling her that, one of the most sort of memorable moments out of undergrad was when the Southwest founder came to Bentley. And he talked about this, exactly what you're saying. He said, when he was at Southwest, they wanted to decrease the turnaround time for their planes. And he was like, I learned more about how to shorten that time by spending a day with baggage loaders outside the plane than sitting in board meetings and presentations from my operating officers, right? And he was like, that was phenomenal, because I understood what their pain points were, and they had ideas on how to improve this. And when we implemented it, we became phenomenally profitable, because it just changed the way the plane turned around. And that's exactly your point, is if you're not on the ground viewing, observing, asking the questions from the people who are closest to the action, you're doing something wrong, because you're not going to innovate that way.
Comfortable offices में बैठ के नहीं startup चल सकती. That's what I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that's a quotable moment from the podcast itself. Look, this has been great. I'm excited about Outclass and where it's headed, and wish you all the best. Before I let you go, I want to just ask you, what are a couple of books that you would recommend to people? It doesn't have to be about entrepreneurship. It can just be things that have been memorable to you and you would recommend others pick up and read.
Yeah, no, there are a few, and I asked my co-founder as well, okay, if what books do you guys recommend? The first one is Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And this one is recommended by Ali, who's a co-founder, and he swears by it. And he thinks I've read it. It's very good. It's basically it's a leadership book to help you understand how to understand perspective from other people's positions, how to think about problems in different ways, and how not to have a single view on anything, and by asking the right questions. So that's one. Something that I would recommend to anyone, regardless of entrepreneurship, like you said, is actually a TED talk. And I'm sure maybe you've it's very popular. Maybe आपने देखी हो. It's by Amy Cuddy called "Fake It Till You Make It," and it's really powerful. She talks about her, how she's now, I think she's a professor at Yale, but she talks about her own journey and how. I don't want to ruin it for you, but it's basically we grow up with this notion about how your the power that your mind has over your body, but this talks about how your body has the power over your mind, which basically means by changing your physical movements, physical postures and gestures, and how you sit, how you walk, how you stand, power poses, how that alters the way you think. So it has a direct connection with your mind and how you start thinking. I think it's great, especially for women. Everybody should watch it. And then the third one is a book called "Happiness is a Choice You Make." It's basically it's written by an investigative journalist. He explores these 90-year-olds and their lives living in New York, and talks to them about what their priorities were, how they view, what their life lessons are on happiness. And it talks about what our priorities should be today based on life lessons already lived by these folks. So I think that's a really good one. Also recommended by Ali to me and now to you. So I hope that this helps.
No, that's awesome. Amy's TED Talk, I agree, is a must watch, and I'm gonna buy the Happiness is a Choice book, because it's also weird in the age that we live in with innovation, science, etc. We sort of become ageist in the sense that we've forgotten the lifelong lessons that our parents, our grandparents, and their parents had, which historically have been passed down by word of mouth, and they're like wisdoms of a culture, etc.
Yeah.
But we've, as we become more digital, we sort of ignored that. And I think there's something missing in terms of we ignore that, right? Because there's a reason why these things were passed down through generations. We need to sort of reconnect with that. So
it hasn't helped. There's this, the rat race that our generation was subjected to or has been a part of. Excuse me. It's actually very important to, just stop and smell the roses, man. Why are we constantly running? 9 out of 10 friends of mine aren't really happy with their corporate lives or their routines. And then, at the end of the day, if on your deathbed, if someone asks you, okay, what did you really live for? Which is what this guy has done in his book. He's asked these 90-year-olds, what made you actually happy? What were those things, so that, you can learn from them. I don't know what will our generation really say. Okay, I managed to present to a bunch of people in a boardroom, or I delivered
on a Zoom session,
or I delivered on my KPIs, and I hit a 30% above my target, or like what is it really that we're running towards, and why can't we stop and enjoy other things and value other things? And what do we need to actually be happy? Why aren't we happy? All of my MBA friends, I don't know how happy people are in their corporate careers or in their everyday lives, because we just tend to forget the things that matter. And I think everybody should stop and reconsider.
I think the second quote from this podcast is "Stop and smell the roses." I think that's an important life lesson too. I'll just, before I let you go, I'll share my own experience. My parents are in town, and so we put out a bird feeder. And every morning now I go and put out some bird food, and every time I want to take a break from my screen, I sort of go and observe, are the birds there? And it's fascinating watching them, because there's an alpha bird that will get into the feeder, and then the others will stand besides it. But then the alpha bird, as it eats, puts some food down on the floor so the others eat. And then every afternoon, a squirrel comes, and one of the squirrels has found a way to jump onto the bird feeder. And it's just fascinating watching it sort of figure that out in terms of the jump it has to make and pull it off every time. But it's fascinating, right? It's not it's stuff that these random animals are doing outside my door, and I watch them and I'm like, wait a minute, there's some intelligence here in terms of how they're operating, and maybe there's something, that it just makes your day when you watch them. So smelling the roses, watching birds, observing plants, like I think those are very important things, especially for many of us who are stuck to our screens. So thank you for that advice. And thank you for your time. This has been wonderful. We'll hopefully have you on again as Outclass scales up, but best of luck for your journey. I think it's a big sector you're trying to disrupt, and sort of the opportunity you're creating is going to have a long tail impact on the country. So kudos to you and your team, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you for having me, and let's connect soon. Hopefully, this won't be a disappointment, and I'll have something to show for in a few months.
I'll see you in Lahore soon.
Yes, inshallah.